great to be here. Thanks, Nitya, and thanks everyone who went to the trouble of organizing this. It's a real pleasure to chat with you, and great talks, everyone. Really impressed. And so in this session, I just thought I would sort of give you my experience and my sort of career sort of path, and then what I'll do is sort of give you some fun tidbits along the way on science communication, and also my research too, because I know a lot of you are interested in circadian rhythms, which is some of my background. So before that, I want to sort of go back to the start and talk about, where our curiosities originate. And I don't know if anyone here remembers or is a fan of Scrubs, the show, or maybe even House, some of that darker comedy. So I'm from England, and I'm from a small town called Bournemouth. And I always had an interest in the human body and sort of biology, but it was definitely shaped by these sort of popular culture references. So I was always into, medical TV shows, documentaries, books on medicine. And so with this kind of interest, in the wider world and in school, and I was kind of, decent with people, I thought, oh, maybe I could be a medical doctor. Like maybe that could be my career path. And so in England, with advanced studies, you do A levels. So this will dictate whatever you study there will then form the basis of what you go on to study in undergrad. And I wanted to do medicine. So biology and chemistry were absolute prerequisites. And then I had some other sort of space to do a couple of other subjects. And I did Spanish for a while, but I'm embarrassed to say that I'm pretty rusty at that now. And I didn't continue it for too long. But what I actually want to finally focus on is the history that I took. So I actually studied 19th century European history. So this was things like the Poor Law in England in the 1830s, like when they were trying to figure out what to do with poverty. And there was these egregious cases of these horrible labor houses. If you've seen or read Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens, that was based during this time. We studied the Crimean War, when in modern day Turkey, when they were trying to repel Russian rulers, and it was this brutal war. And then even the unification of Italy after the Napoleonic Wars. And I know you're thinking, this is a science communication talk. Why the hell are we talking about the Crimean War? The point is, for one, it gave me kind of a wider view of the world, sort of finding out, what the trials and tribulations were in history. And secondly, it really taught me how to write, long form essays, coherently making arguments, using sources, figuring out biases. And this is such an important skill, and one that we'll just come back to again and again during the talk, which is, if you can write well, it's such a huge asset. Anytime you write, you are advocating for something, and often you're advocating for yourself. So think about that, and think about ways you can practice your writing. So I thought I was figured out. I had good grades. I applied to med schools, and I waited and I waited, and I just got a bunch of rejections. I had one interview, it went terribly. My backup choice was actually biomedical science instead, and funnily enough, it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. I did this at University of Birmingham, so right in the Midlands of England. I don't know if any of you have watched Peaky Blinders, but that's where Peaky Blinders was set. And you know what? It was pretty similar. Same accents, just same amount of beer, but maybe some less murder. And then the real value of the course for me was the research experience. And so I'm actually doing an article right now for our Scripps magazine called The Seed of Curiosity. So I'm profiling a number of grad students, and I'm asking them all the same question, what was it that made you pursue science? What was those key experiences? And even though they're all from different backgrounds, the key threads are, one, they had really important mentors that supported them and pushed them to pursue research. And secondly was they got in early and they got hands-on research experience. And this is so crucial. As early as you can, get as much experience as you can. And that is exactly what the scene was for me. So in my second year, this is when I first got proper research experience. So when everyone was home for the summer, I managed to get a scholarship to do a 10-week research experience in an immunology lab. This guy here, John Kerno, he was our immunology lecturer and also my tutor as well. And he ran an ophthalmology lab for the eyes, and it's so fascinating. Our eyes are so exposed. We get crap in them all day long. We're always rubbing them, contact lenses, and yet we get so few eye infections. And so the reason is because it's an immunoprivileged site, And so one of the projects I was doing is, and shadowing people was, I was looking at the role of specific proteins within these T cell immune populations that give that kind of protection. And so that was second year. Third year, I actually got very interested in the cardiovascular system instead. And the bulk of the third year was actually spent in the lab doing research. So again, it was just more exposure, and this kind of shaped my interest to continue cardiovascular sciences. So I went on to pursue that at Oxford. I managed to get a scholarship there. And this is my college, St. Cross. And yes, it was just like Harry Potter. I know what you're thinking. What we were interested in studying was the heart problems that accompany diabetes. This is such a big issue. There's so much diabetes, type 1 and type 2 in our culture these days. And often these heart problems go undiagnosed, and it can become a big issue. So what we were, in a model of diabetes, what we were figuring out is in the diabetic state, the heart loses this ability to fluctuate and use different fuels. So usually it would use glucose and lipids and other fuels. And so this becomes a problem in diabetes. And then what we were able to show with genetic manipulation and with the use of supplementation is that if you boost the levels of a molecule inside the heart called nitric oxide, which usually controls blood flow and it helps the heart contract and relax more effectively, this can actually restore and prevent these defects. And this schematic, in fact, comes from the paper of this work, which just got published last January. So, it only took 5 years. During that time, I had a friend, a good friend, who was involved in this editorial that the Oxford Biochemical Society put out, and it was called Phenotype. It was a student-run magazine. And so I asked her about this, and she encouraged me to get involved, and I eventually became a part of the editorial team. So I was a section editor for the research highlights section, and I wrote some articles for it as well. And this is one of the articles I wrote that was talking about the biological importance of sleep for brain health and productivity. And so even here, I was sort of interested in the big picture. And even here, I was trying to write an article that would be of interest to not just like an expert neuroscientist. And so this is a key thing to remember. It's like, if you're going to be writing something for a wider audience, you have to use language that people understand. So know your audience. It's a huge, huge point. Another thing is, like I said, I knew this friend. And so I would say surround yourself with other well-rounded individuals who are doing these cool things. And so you have these opportunities to get involved. Teaching as well. That is a huge, huge skill. So I did just a bit of teaching. I was a lab demonstrator for med students. I taught them some pharmacology experiments with the professors, and teaching others really teaches yourself. It doesn't have to be science. It can be a language. It could be music, martial arts, anything, dancing. You never really know something unless you can convey that, relay it, and teach somebody else. And so I finished my PhD, and I wasn't necessarily quite sure if I wanted to do a postdoc. But the nice thing about a postdoc is something to think about, guys. It sort of cements your scientific career. You can become an independent researcher then and sort of pursue your own more self-directed projects. It gives you that sort of more credibility. It's also a natural progression. And it also allowed me to, with the visa system, to travel somewhere else. And I wanted to come to the US. So it was a good opportunity there. I would recommend, and other people say this too, to diversify the science from what you did at your PhD level. So I liked metabolism still, but I moved away from cardiovascular science. And that's a good practice to sort of expand your skill set. And I was interested in the circadian clock. So I know a lot of you here are interested in circadian rhythms, and we had some sort of talks and poster presentations on this. But for those of you maybe not so familiar, circa means about, and DN means day. So it's about a day. And so our circadian clock is our internal biological clock, our internal biological rhythm that has a 24-hour period. And if you think about it, we evolved to exist and thrive on an approximately 24-hour period, you know, as the Earth rotates. So we had to anticipate these changes in our environment accordingly with our different physiological outputs. And so these are some of those outputs here. If you look at the diagram, you know, things that you'd be familiar with, perhaps, like, you know, when you get hungry, when you get tired, and then stuff that you might not consider, you know, our hormones, they follow a 24-hour cycle, you know, our body temperature, things like that. And it's so important. And in fact, it was recognized in 2017, its importance, with the Nobel Prize. So these three gents here actually discovered the molecular machinery that makes up that circadian rhythm and that circadian clock in our cells. And so I decided to join the lab of Katja Lemire, who's in the molecular medicine department on the California campus. And her lab does a great, you know, many deal of things. And some of it is like DNA damage and cancer and how cancer develops, you know, in response to shift work or jet lag. And some of it is, you know, metabolism and exercise, you know, how does our muscle function? And so, you know, that was something that I was specifically interested in. And again, this idea of the circadian clock went with my overall interest in health. You know, when we go, you know, how much sleep do we get? Are we exposed to enough sunlight, exercise, you know, diet, things like that? And so it seems obvious, but that is just another key thing too. Like, make sure you're pursuing a project that you are really, really passionate about with its impact. You know, there's a great quote, which is, you know, with a big enough why, you can endure almost any how, which is, you know, if your reasons for doing something are, you know, rock solid and you're passionate about it, then you will stick with it no matter, you know, when you run into difficulties. And so I was interested in exercise and time of day. You know, how does our clock and how does the time of day affect exercise performance and overall health? And so if we were all in the same room, I would, you know, ask a show of hands, you know, when do you guys prefer to exercise? And so there's a good chance that there'd be a variety of responses. You know, some of you would be more morning people. Some of you would be like the morning lark, early bird catches the worm. Some of you would be more night owls, you know, people that hate mornings. It's like, I can't imagine doing anything in the morning. I'm more active, you know, in the evening. And this is something that we call our chronotype. So our behavioral preference for doing things at certain times of day. And so most people fall somewhere in the middle of that. And in spite of those things, what's really interesting, if you look across studies and even documentation around Olympic records being set, it seems like there's this trend of exercise performance being greater in the afternoon and evening versus the morning. And this is especially the case for those types of exercise that require, you know, very high power output and lots of strength and sort of anaerobic and aerobic capacity. So particularly sprinting, sprint cycling, and swimming. And so this is something, you know, we wanted to explore more. And this is in fact a review that I wrote with my supervisor, Katja. And there are so many theories on, you know, why exercise capacity might be different throughout the day. And this complex diagram on the left is that molecular clock I was talking about. It's this complex system of these different proteins, you know, in the circles here that bind to our DNA, the squiggly lines, and they influence all these different pathways that cause changes to our physiology. And so some of the changes that they cause that have been sort of hypothesized to affect exercise capacity throughout the day is things like changes in our core body temperature, the way our nervous system, our nerves actually recruit our muscles, changes in the efficiency of our heart and our lungs, differences in the fibers themselves, the mechanics of the muscle. And then something that we were really interested in was actually how are nutrients, how energy sources affect this. So how are different energy sources like fats versus carbohydrates stored and then used in the muscle to supply energy for exercise. And so this is something we studied further in models of sprint capacity, because that's what we wanted to know. How is this different throughout the day, and why? And so when I would tell people that for a living I would run mice on a mini treadmill, they looked at me like I was out of my mind. But this is like pretty much what we did, because this is how you assess, sprint capacity running them. And the other thing you'll notice is this is not a filter. This is actually a photo taken in red light. It looks like something from Kill Bill, but the reason is that if you're looking at mice's exercise capacity in the morning versus evening, well, they're nocturnal. They're not like us. So their morning and evening, it's all going to be in the dark. Luckily for us, this type of mice, they can't see red light. So for them, it just mimics darkness. So we had red lights installed in the mouse facility. And so we can see, but for them, it just seems like it's dark. But it's funny, you speak to some circadian researchers, they don't have these red lights. So they have to wear these like night vision goggles, like the, special ops Navy SEALs going in to do their experiments. And so we were looking at sprint ability just in the baseline state. So, laying around on the couch, just sedentary mice, as well as mice that had been trained. So they'd had access to running wheels and they love to run, because that's another thing we wanted to know. How does these circadian changes influence and are influenced by training adaptations? And so I'll just show this one graph here, which is, this shows maximum speed that the mice could attain, so their sprint ability. And then it shows, if you look at the black dots, we have the mice that are untrained. So this is just them at baseline. And then the red dots are those where the mice have been trained. And then on the x-axis here, we have the timing. So we have the mouse's morning and the mouse's evening. And what you'll see, if just looking at the black dots, if the mice are untrained, then there's no difference between the time of day. But it's when they've been trained, that's when you see this improvement in evening performance relative to morning. So what we've been able to see is that in male mice, at least, these training adaptations are what reveal an increase in the evening versus the morning exercise performance. We've also shown that the training itself alters rhythms throughout the day that control how energy is stored and used by the muscle. And then the impact of this, this is a huge area of interest for public health authorities that are trying to guide, health and exercise recommendations. It's big for the military, for their training. And of course, it is a huge area of interest for sports teams, getting their athletes to have that extra edge, especially if they're traveling, across time zones and they're jet lagged. During this time, I wanted to sort of continue my writing in some way. And I knew someone in our lab who wrote a blog for the Center for Circadian Biology. So this is a consortium run by UCSD, and it's great. It has all the circadian labs are part of it, and it brings these labs together for conferences. It provides educational resources in the world of circadian rhythms. And so we had this, they run this blog that was called Clocks in the News. And so when my colleague she left, I continued doing the writing for these blog posts. And so I would take any interesting discovery and paper that had come out in the world of circadian rhythms that had got sort of some popular interest in the news, and I would write these short summaries for students in the circadian fields. And so that's a great exercise to take any sort of discovery and be able to pick out the key messages and convey that to a wider audience. And what I want to say here is that, again, think about getting involved, take on some leadership, take the initiative. These places are often looking for writers. And if this stuff doesn't exist, there's no reason why you can't create a newsletter. You can't create a blog for them, for the website. They're often hungry for this kind of thing. So this was just more good writing experience. Okay, All right, so switching out the pen for the microphone. This was 2017 as well. I was really into podcasts, and podcasts have just grown so much. Such a great way to access information. And I thought to myself, it would be so cool if the Institute had a podcast. And I loved them. I liked speaking to people. I liked learning things. So I thought, why couldn't I start one? And so with the help of the Careers and Postdoc Office, particularly Gene Brannon, who's since left, and Ryan Wheeler, big shout out to him, they really helped me and they championed this idea. And so I got a microphone. I used this audio editing software called Audacity. And, I started interviewing people and, eventually got on the radar of the communications team, who I was also reaching out to. And now it is the, podcast of Scripps Research. So it's called Prescription Sound. It's the logo, places you can listen. And it's also, on the website as a key medium now of communication. And the real idea behind the podcast was I wanted to interview cool people internally and externally doing cool things in science that would be of interest to the wider world. And I didn't just want to know about the science. I wanted to know about them, hearing from the humans behind the research, which is, I think, really attractive. People are interested in other people. And so these are some examples of questions I would ask them on the left. How did you become passionate about this work? What's your background? Do you have a personal connection with the disease or the subject? How's it shaped your view of the world? Hobbies, advice you'd give people. And I just want to highlight this special episode here, which was one I did with Dr. Amanda Roberts, who's in the behavioral animal core, behavioral sciences. And she had this amazing collaboration. She worked with NASA, where they were sending mice up into space, looking at their behavior and health up there, and when they returned back to Earth, which is just so fascinating. They were looking at anti-gravity as a model of accelerated aging and looking at it as a way to inform future spaceflight. And it was such a cool episode. We had a great dynamic. And I just want to say that we actually submitted the podcast to the San Diego Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Awards. And I've got a plaque here. We managed to win first place in the Best in Show for a podcast or radio entry. And so that's just to say, if you're creating this cool content, don't be afraid to enter it into certain competitions. You never try if you never know if you never try, rather. And then down the bottom here, some interview skills and things to think about, just when you're talking with people. Listening is king. Don't be so in your head about thinking, like playing the mental movie of what I'm going to say to this person next. Like, listen and interpret what they are saying. And it makes you able to bounce off the conversation, keeps it dynamic. Make sure you're asking them open-ended questions, not just things that require a yes, no. Simplify and summarize things. If it's a long explanation and you're trying to translate it to somebody else, simplify it if necessary. Have fun, for goodness sake. Like, put them at ease. Make it fun, make it lighthearted. Humor is magnetic often. And remember, you could be respectful, but they are only human. Just don't put them up on this pedestal, because then it's going to dilute the conversation with nerves. Okay, so this is cool. Let me tell you another story. At the time, about the same time I was doing this, I was helping the philanthropy team. So with a fundraising team. And so they are great with potential donors, but they don't always know the science and which scientists are working in certain areas. So getting to know them, they would often ask me, they would say, hey, do you know certain scientists working in this, disease or this area? Because we have a potential donor who's interested. And this really nice couple here on the right, they were really passionate about liver disease. Their family had been affected by that. And so one day the fundraising team was saying to me, hey, do you know anyone working in like the liver space and liver diseases? And, I didn't, and I didn't think much of it. And then the next week I'm walking through the immunology building and I run into this guy here, Joe, my pal. And he's a member of the PostDoc Society. So I knew him that way. I'd seen him playing volleyball once or twice. And he's sitting on the floor and he's going through his samples in the freezer, and he's pulling out these samples. And, we get talking, and I say to him, hey, what are you working on? And this kind of stuff. And turns out these are liver sections. And his lab works on hepatitis and liver cancer. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that's great. All right, see you later. And then I kind of did that double take, like, wait, what did you say you worked on? And so, we get talking some more. And in the end, it ended up connecting him and his supervisor here, Philippe Gallet, to the fundraising team. And then the way it worked out, the couple came in for a tour of the lab and they ended up donating to the lab. And that is just such a real life example of the power of networking. You never know what it might lead to. Just, stop, have that conversation in the hallway, reach out. There's so many examples of collaborations, job prospects coming about because people actually just reached out during a networking session or like over drinks and actually just got talking in an informal way. So that's so important. And so right now, and so with that experience, I had this vision of, if I was to transition out of the lab, it would be great to be this connector. Could I be the liaison in the middle of, the communications team, the fundraising team, and then work with the faculty? And so this is kind of my job title now, scientific liaison. And I joke that I'm a jack of all trades, master of nothing. I generate lots of content, whether it's podcasts, writing articles and blog posts. I have that liaison role for, campus videos and doing meetings, some marketing with newsletters. And then I also, I manage all the social media too. Okay, so enough about me specifically and on to just some general recommendations now. So you should be thinking about this framework on the left anytime you are communicating science, whether it's your own elevator pitch to your Uber driver or grandmother, or if it's like communicating a big discovery more formally. So firstly, what is the problem? What's the need? What's the rationale? Why should we care about this? We had some great examples of the folks who just gave their talks. They correctly identified this. Why should society care about this issue? Secondly, what's the approach? What's the innovation? What are you doing that's different? Like, how are you solving the problem? Why should people listen to you? And lastly, most importantly, what is the human impact? What is the overall thing that this is going to achieve? How is it going to change or save people's lives? Because at the end of the day, friends, mentors, the wider world, funding bodies, that's what they want to know. So within that framework, techniques, again, know your audience. That's so critical. That will help you tailor your message and language accordingly. Use language people are going to understand. Avoid that jargon. If you have to use some of it, make sure you define it first. Use metaphors if you can. That can be really powerful, especially if it's a specific, like a person-specific metaphor, if you know them. The rule of threes is great. You see politicians and good speakers do this all the time. If you're within a sentence, using a trio of events or reasons, within that, which you can list, which is often more compelling than just one or two. Humor, again, that's really magnetic. That's a great aspect. And then lastly, make it human. That is so, so important. Put a human face on things. You cannot displace a feeling with a fact. This is a Ed Yong quote. Ed Yong's a great writer for the Scientific American. He says people make decisions and resonate with things that are personal, emotional, not just a cold fact. That's never gonna stick in someone's mind. And this next quote, I don't know if you recognize this. A single death is a tragedy. A million deaths is just a statistic. So this is actually Joseph Stalin, evil socialist dictator from Russia in the 1930s, when millions of people were starving, especially in the Ukraine. It's such a disturbing quote, but it's so true. It's so powerful. If we see the person suffering, if we see that one person with a human face, that really pulls on our heartstrings. We empathize. If it's just a million of unknown people and just a million people that, we can't see their day-to-day life, we're overwhelmed. The empathy gets diluted. So you'll see every well-crafted charity or nonprofit messaging, they'll use that family or that one child to really, grip your emotion. Okay, just a little bit on social media. We can touch on it more at the end if you like, with how to use the different platforms, but think about the content that you're producing. Obviously, if it's just resharing, posts or news coverage, it's maybe not that original unless you have some, cool insight within your caption. So think about all the different actual pieces of content that you can generate first and then share. So, I've done some of these things, like this is a blog post. I do Q&As with the faculty, fun, get to knows. I've done live streams, Facebook Lives. Then think about the language too, the tone and what you say. It can be funny. It doesn't have to be stifled. Alexa, how sick am I? Talking about AI in healthcare. Remember to use hashtags and appropriate handles for people or news outlets. A lot of people are on, say, like Twitter, and this is a great way to get more traffic. Link to sources wherever you can and give people credit. Using fun imagery. This image here is the first use of ether, like 175 years ago, as an anesthetic. And it's such a cool way of talking about, okay, here's a new study on how anesthesia works. Okay, so I'll play this video here, if it'll play, because this is really, really cool. So we talked about the importance of writing, and that is a foundation, obviously. There's no getting around that. But there are other ways to communicate your science, which you should be thinking about too. And a big shout out here to Haley Perrette. I think she had a poster graduate student in the Ward Lab. And at the start of the pandemic, she, wisely realized that the Institute was looking for more creative, fun ways to represent the coronavirus. So this amazing illustration has formed the basis now of a very successful explainer video series that, we've all put out in the communications office and with the lab's help, which, shows different aspects of the coronavirus and COVID-19. And, it's gone on to win awards. It's a big hit on YouTube, and it's even been on ABC and NBC News. So I will just say that, if you are artistically inclined, PR outlets, news firms, organizations are always looking for new, fun, creative ways to get a message across. And a picture speaks 1,000 words. So, think about this. If you're good at art, you can bring this into your communication. And here's just another few examples here of different areas of science and cool visuals to go with it. On that note as well, if it's not art, what about some other things? Like, are you a wizard with web development or web design? Communication is only as good as the infrastructure that supports it. And when you see a good website, right? It's really clean, like crisp panels, good links. Maybe there's a video playing in the background. It's very dynamic, and it pulls you in and it keeps you there. So, that's a valuable asset. Also, if you can organize events, virtual events or in-person events, that's good if you can manage people. So think about those other areas of communication too. So I guess that kind of brings me to the end. And I would just say, if you're a great writer and, you're good with people and you can network and you're a good listener and you're always looking to expand your skill set, like you can become unstoppable, because this stuff you'll need in every aspect of your life, no matter what you're going on to pursue career-wise. So I'll just end with this slide, which is a collection of additional resources, on science communication, or just like different writing styles, and just books on leadership and other areas of science where like I've really enjoyed the writing. And if you have any questions beyond this, you can email me, and then we're happy to stop and just get the conversation started and answer some questions. And it can really be about anything.
Thank you so much, Drew. This was such a wonderful presentation. I think You bring such a unique perspective into these alternate skills that scientists can use to, go into these, different careers that still utilize or is in these scientific space. So I really appreciate it. A wonderful presentation.
Yeah, pleasure.
I would really like to open it up to the audience if anyone has any questions for Drew, whether about his career, about these skills. I think, Eris, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. You kind of touched on it a little bit about like social media. And so
Yeah.
I'm wondering like, I'm kind of curious why a lot of scientists use Twitter. I mean, yeah, I'm just why that platform. I'm like,
yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of weird. It's kind of fun to see how this has evolved. And, at the beginning, when it first came along, I was just like, Twitter, you just write something and it's like 240, 280 characters. It's like, what the hell is that? Like, why is that going to be a big thing? But I think the way it's evolved, I think Facebook fell away, I think, and it was very much being used for marketing. Facebook had those shenanigans with privacy and tracking, and it was so much. It was just like photos and videos and long posts and this kind of stuff. And I think the niche Twitter carved out was more like news. And I think it just so happens that people of influence and news outlets all sort of gravitated towards that. With the way the hashtags and the handle, the @ system worked. I think that just became a very effective way of tagging people and sharing things. So I think that's what it is. The other thing is Twitter, the way the threads work, there can be a lot of interaction, and sharing links is pretty effective, which like you can't do on Instagram. Instagram's great for very visual stuff and it's a very much younger audience. So I think that's the way it sort of took off. And yeah, it's just very newsy. It's like Twitter's great, but it's such a quick half-life of news. Like if you're not first on something, you're last. It's like such a quick turnover. But those are just my kind of insights.
Yeah. I just got a quick follow-up question, sir.
Go ahead.
Do you think that affects like how science is viewed in terms of validity? Because you have, all sorts of inputs, people are posting all kinds of information. Does that do you think it affects the validity of the science just because the amount of content, whether it's like true or false?
Man. Oh man, in the age of, I don't know how to answer this. It's unfortunate that Twitter included, it's unfortunate that the big tech companies in Silicon Valley have taken it upon themselves to decide arbitrarily often what they deem as truth or, fake news or non-scientific. So I do think there is an issue with that validity, but it's not automatically apparent that, if a new scientific study or wise commentary on science comes out, if it goes against the current status quo, it is open to being, let's say, silenced. So I do think censorship is an issue too. But yeah, I do think it kind of runs the gamut from like, the crazy town to very valid theories that just aren't necessarily in the wider public eye. So I don't know if that's much of an answer for you. I suppose it has allowed the growth of sort of preprints and, bioarchive and sort of not quite fully peer-reviewed stuff to sort of reach the masses, which, can be good or bad. If something turns out not to be true, then maybe it's not great that it had such a following, but I suppose it's good in that way.
Cool, thank you.
So I see that we have 2 audience members with their hands raised, but I also wanted to read a question from the chat. What are your thoughts on having these skills developed in a high school setting?
Please, I wish it was done more. I mean, I think some of these skills should be nurtured as soon as possible. I mean, especially, being social and networking and writing effectively. I mean, I think this should really be a critical skill, not just getting people into science, but also the skill sets that come with making that science, available to everyone. So it would be really, really cool if there were courses and more directives there in a high school setting. Yeah.
Great. So we can have Pierce go first and then Toki.
First off, great presentation, really good presentation. So what are your thoughts on using TikTok to communicate science? And then also, what's your favorite social media platform to use?
Yeah, it's funny. We've had some discussion in our team on, should we go to TikTok? And then there's also what is it, Clubhouse, and there's even some other social media other channels growing, and it's hard. It's, TikTok is definitely got the younger audience, which is cool. I think some of the issues are, one is a big time investment. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but as well as all my other roles, I'm posting and monitoring content across, at least four social media channels, and it's so time consuming. I mean, I would implore everyone to take breaks from this and segment your usage, because it does wear on your mental health and takes you away from that other actual deep work. So one is just a time investment, I think, that we haven't engaged with it. The other thing is, we're worried about stuff, actual appropriateness of content, let's say. So sometimes it can't be monitored as effectively. So I think, for us, that could be the TikTok space. It would be kind of difficult to see, always what was kind of being published. And I think, we depend a lot on other people. Like, it would be very hard centrally for us as an office to develop and monitor these accounts. But yeah, I think, if people are using it for science communication, then that's cool, especially in the younger students. I mean, sorry, just to jump in. I mean, do people here use TikTok for science? I mean, maybe you could tell me. I don't know if anyone, jump in.
I don't think I've ever seen it, but I think it would be a hit.
Yeah.
I've seen people use it before. Like I heard somebody describe like how COVID works, basically how it enters your cells, and I saw a video of somebody explaining how vaccines work. I think TikTok is really, really popular right now, especially among young people. So I think it's useful as a platform with engaging people pretty much purely because it's so popular. And with the tremendous amount of misinformation that is constantly being spread on these platforms, that is perpetuated by these platforms, the more actual science that gets spilled into these platforms, the better. The more you can dilute the misinformation with actual information, the better. So I don't know. That's just my insight.
Cool. Yeah, this is such a dynamic, just to round that out, it's such a dynamic space. I mean, who knows where actually a lot of this stuff is going social media wise, and what's going to be big in the next couple of years.
Definitely. Toki, did you have a question?
Yes. First, thank you for your presentation. And I have a question. Like, I have never seen so many collaborations between scientists like during the COVID-19 pandemic before. So I'd like to know that whether in the future the use of social media will facilitate the collaboration between scientists from different institutes in the future.
Yeah, I think so. It's a great point. And, we are younger, say our Scripps fellows, like younger faculty who have been fast tracked to become sort of have their own labs. They've actually told me that they have certainly through Twitter and sort of the thread system, they've definitely developed some collaborations, both, you know, internally, which is very easy because you just go and contact them, but also people from different institutes and like different countries through sort of that functionality. So I do think that will just continue. And, you know, especially with, like you said, the power of, you know, having a common goal and a common problem, like a pandemic that brings people together. It is good for that, I will say. Yeah.
And I have a following up questions. Like, do you think that the use of the social media can spread the scientific information to people, even people with non-scientific background? Because I saw some podcasts such as the Drift or the Dream from from Dr. Racaniello, and I've never seen such such active podcast before. Like in about 2015, there were about three or four episodes like a month or in 2 months. But right now, I saw something like 2 or 3 podcasts like in a week. And do you think that it will spread the scientific information to non-scientific background people, to draw a lot of people into the science?
Yeah, I think it definitely has the capacity. On the social media front, I think it very much depends on the way you word things, you know, especially if you have like a 280 character limit. It's like, you know, how well can I explain this like deep chemistry concept in like 3 lines? But I think it does depend on the language you use, again, to pull people in who aren't, you know, necessarily well versed in the subject. You know, can you break it down to the key messages and show some impact, you know, within the social media framework? You know, maybe explaining that again with the use of cool graphics, those explainer videos that we did, which were very much geared for a general audience. Yeah, I think those are really powerful. And then with the podcasts, certainly. I mean, you know, the power of podcasts is, you know, you can listen to things while you're doing other stuff. You know, like you're driving or you're cleaning the house. It's like, you don't have to sit there and be reading something. And, you know, there's still a section of the population that, you know, can't read, or maybe, you know, they have difficulty reading. So, you know, listening is often something that is way more accessible. So I do think that's such a powerful area of science communication, actually conveying that through speech and audio. And I think that is, I mean, you guys probably have some favorite science podcasts too that you like to listen to. So, you know, you can find certainly some great ones for, you know, getting sort of key messages across in science that, you know, might not be very well versed in. And again, the thing that you'll notice with that often is that they craft it around like a cool narrative or like a personal story. So it's like an engaging story. It's not just, you know, here are the facts broken down.
Thank you so much for your information.